Welcome. This is Out of the Box Economics. Let me talk about the week, and in particular about two indicators, inflation and economic activity. And as it is our custom, let me focus on the implications for the future, not on the history. So let me start with inflation. What is going to be released is July's data. So we can expect annual inflation to drop to 5.7, 5.6%, coming down from 5.9% in the first half of July. But more important still is to underline that, as you can see in your screens, inflation, in particular accumulated inflation, is far above a typical year. It is true that most of the shocks and most of the inflationary pressures that are explaining this trend are temporary in nature. But yet it is also important to underline that the risks of contamination of medium-term inflation expectations and salary formation is there. So that is why Banco de Mexico has taken a very optimal decision on acting preemptively and increasing or hiking the policy rate. My take of this data is that there is enough reasons to expect Banxico to keep on hiking, in particular in September, though I do not think that another 25 basis point hike is granted for November. But let's focus on September. And what would happen in September? That the real rate would still be below or within a accommodative region. In particular, real rate would be just slightly above 1% real rate, which is clearly below what Banxico is expecting to be the neutral level of real interest rate, which is around 2.7%. So that's the main idea of this. Despite Banxico acting, this is preemptively, and again, this is not meaning a tightening cycle. This is still leaving monetary conditions in accommodative space. Second point, let's talk about economic activity. Well, this week, in particular on Wednesday, we are going to see July's economic activity, monthly economic activity being released. But let me talk about the future, and let me take into account that Mexico is already going through a third wave of COVID-19 cases. But the main points to be taken here, or to be taken into account here, and speaking strictly in economic terms, is that while we are seeing a pickup, a tangible and sharp pickup in cases, stringent policies have just risen quite slightly. So restrictions to mobility are not that important or are not that strict as in the second wave or as the first wave. So that would mean that potentially the shock of an economic activity would be limited. And if we take a look at recent data on mobility, we can see how we do not see a reflection on cases regarding a restriction on mobility. On the contrary, we think that mobility is keep on feeding expectations of limited economic impact during the third quarter of this year. And as you can see in your screens, what we can see just now is that there are at least three scenarios that we can take into account. One, what would happen if, in terms of economic cost, this new third wave is similar to the second wave? What would happen if this is equivalent to a fraction of the first wave, let's say a quarter, or let's say half? In particular, you can see how if we take into account or we assume that this wave in terms of economic cost would be similar to the second wave, rather limited, we can still expect economic growth to be at about 7% this year. Yet, in my case, I expect economic activity to have a negative impact, obviously to reflect a negative impact, and in the end to close slightly below 6%, which is, in my example, quite similar to a quarter of the impact of the first wave. Hence, this is all this time for me. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you in my next video. Thank you very much.